I'm Dave Baltzer, and on a rainy day in New Mexico, I'm going to prepare some daily drinker tea and 5 alternatives. And first I want to make a point that I just washed my hands because hygiene is important in the world of tea. Next point I'm going to make is that because it's a daily drinker tea, I'm pulling these items right out of the dishwasher. And you notice that made some noise, and some people like their tea quiet and dry, and my tea is going to be wet and noisy. So this tea tray is one that the Imperial Tea Court I've used and had enjoyed tea with it at their Berkeley Center when they had the restaurant there. Plain old strainer and 2 pitchers. And these pitchers were both gifts. I forget who gave them to me, but I like this one because I can use it to scoop out the tea leaves when I'm done. And I like this one because it has a good pouring spout and it's for decanting. And we'll talk about decanting a little bit more later. But let's start out with a basic green tea called Dragon Well from the Zhejiang province. And I'm going to show you the leaf. This tea costs $6.25 for an ounce. There are 30 grams in an ounce, so 5 grams per event equals 6 encounters, 8 steepings per event, that's 48 6-ounce cups of tea. $6.25 divided by 48 equals 13 cents per cup. What we're not doing is having an imperial grade Dragon Well tea from the same province, and that is Jingming, picked before the rain in April of this year. I already had this tea by the end of April of this year. It cost $30 per ounce, and so it's 52 cents per cup, and it looks like this. Picked specially before the rain, when the leaves are more tender, before the harsh sunlight of the spring and summer hits it, picked by people who are very well trained in small villages. And these leaves are perfect. It would probably be 2 leaves in a bud. Each one will open up with its serrated leaf, and there won't be any bug bites, no fungus, no mold, no anything, and they will be whole, complete leaves. And I like to see the leaves when I'm making the tea. So now what we're going to do is by eye. I'm just going to say by eye. I'm going to put in what I think, because I know these leaves, I've done this a lot. I'm going to make a high leaf to water ratio, and I like that because I like to see these leaves floating in these clear glass pitchers. And the water has already been heated, and I'm using Brita water, filtered, that's sat for a while. And yes, the instructions say 160-degree water, but this is a daily drinker tea, so I'm not measuring the tea temperature of the water. And I'm going to give this a little stir. That would look unofficial to some people to stir the tea. However, if we were using a gaiwan, it's very traditional to stir the tea with the lid. And I don't know how people do this in China to drink it out of the gaiwan because it would be too hot for me. But the point is, yes, you can stir the tea on a daily drinker setup. And I'm going to say that that's already tea. So I didn't time it. But if you look at the color of the tea, it is tea. And Roy Fong, in his book, The Great Teas of China, starts out talking about Dragon Well tea. He has a picture of what the color would be, right? And it's Longjing or Dragon Well. The ideal of this tea, if you were in a perfect world, would be to drink water from the Dragon Well and have locally grown Dragon Well tea. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about 13 cents per cup. Now, I like my tea a little on the cool side, so I'm using a single-walled large mug, and that is the first steeping. So I'm going to already put on some water for second steeping. Let that sit there for a moment. And let's talk about caffeine, because this is a daily drinker tea. James Norwood Pratt, in his book, A New Tea Lover's Treasury, wrote on page 182, How to Decaf Tea. Caffeine is highly soluble and is one of the first constituents of the tea leaf to be extracted in steeping. Usually, 80% of the tea's caffeine content is released within the first 20 to 30 seconds of steeping. You can enjoy virtually caffeine-free tea with a small sacrifice of flavor, therefore by discarding the water after the first 30 to 60 seconds. So, these are 6-ounce pitchers. A 6-ounce cup of tea, according to the literature, has about 50 grams of caffeine. And so, let's get this guy back in there. 80% of the caffeine is gone after the first steeping, which means that there's only 20% of the caffeine remaining, which means it's 10 milligrams of caffeine. And I'll take that in here because I don't mind the caffeine. But this will be the third steeping, which means it'll just have 2 milligrams of caffeine. So if I start drinking my daily drinker tea at home after I get home from work, the first steeping or two is going to have the caffeine, and then the last, let's say, 6 steepings will be relatively decaf by definition of decaf, which is about 2 to 5 milligrams of caffeine. And so I didn't time myself again. The literature will say X amount of minutes, but I'm going by feel because I like my tea a certain way. And this is the third steeping. I'm putting it in a double-walled glass because some people like their tea hot. And now here's the advantage of the decanter. Going for fourth steeping, and put the water back on the heat. I'm not measuring the temperature of the water, by the way. They do make these nice things that will hold the temperature of water to an exact degree, as long as you want to hold it at an exact degree. And if you want to have 160 degree water for your green tea, you can. But this is a daily drinker tea, and we're not doing that. And so I've already got 3 steepings here. I'm going to say this one is ready. I like to see the full leaves just floating there in the water, dancing around a little bit. And this is the 4th steeping. And already I'm making a little mess on the tea tray, which is just fine because it's a daily drinker and I just wash my hands. If I want to throw these guys back in with their friends, I can. So this is our 4th steeping. And so it's definitely decaf. And normally I would be sharing this with members of the family. So we've got first 2 steepings, 3rd, 4th. And for people that ask, like my sister did, can you make them all at once? Yeah, I could make all these at once, these different steepings, and be ready for the day if I put them in a large container. I've reheated the water. And so this is going to be number 5. People don't believe you can do this. You can't do it with a tea bag, but you can do it this way. Give this a moment here. And again, these leaves were steeping. They were doing chemical reactions the whole time, even when they were just sitting there. And they'll be doing that even when they're sitting in this decanter. And because I like my water hot for this, I'm going to go straight to 6th steeping. Sometimes I lose count. So, how did I get interested in tea? My wife and I were living in Ireland, and in the late 70s, in 1977, I was working at the largest teaching hospital in Dublin, St. James on the Liffey. And a coworker and I, during a break, went into a break room, and he prepared some tea by boiling some water and taking some black loose leaf tea. Here's a black loose leaf tea. I'll talk about this in a minute. But he prepared this tea, and it was probably Lipton loose leaf tea. And then we each had a cup of tea in our hands, and he says, after he takes a sip, I can still hear the way he said it, "Ah, now that's a cup of tea." Now at the time, Ireland, according to my research, was the highest per capita tea drinking country on planet Earth. Right now, country. If you take a look right now at the internet, it will say that Turkey has more higher per capita tea consumption, but Ireland still ranks the second. And so over there I drank a lot of black tea using porcelain and teaware, and even would blend teas that I called Baltzer's Blend, different black teas. And when I had a chance then to learn about Chinese tea, it just became a passion that even had me touring for 2 weeks in China with tea experts and Roy Fong, the owner of the Imperial Tea Court in San Francisco, author of this book. So, talking about green tea here and what is a daily drinker. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 steepings. Let's put this in here. We'll put this in the decanter. And again, what this is not, I'll give you an example. Is what I had an experience in Roy Fong's original Imperial Tea Court on Powell Street in Chinatown in San Francisco about 25 or 30 years ago. My wife came in the shop and then went out to look around Chinatown, and I was alone in there with a tea master and a student. Everyone else had gone. This was an old-fashioned Chinese tea house. It had birds in bird cages and a lot of plants and a very dark place. And the student prepared tea that was criticized by the master for having been steeped 3 seconds too long. So again, that is not what we're talking about here. I'm going by feel, I'm going by look. I will stir this again. And let's just pull out this little leaf right here, which looks rather complete. Oh, it's a little bit broken. But that is one relatively complete tea leaf. If it had been these before the rain teas, they would be all complete. And I think I am now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And if you don't believe I can make 8 steepings out of this tea, as long as it's got flavor and color, it's tea. And so as I learned in nursing school, there are 3 main chemicals in tea. Now they list many more with all the antioxidants, but back then it was caffeine, theophylline, and theobromine. So the caffeine is a stimulant and the other 2 are relaxers. So by the end of the evening, I'm drinking decaf, which is a relaxer before I go to bed. And if I on a weekend want to have tea all day long, I can. But one of the reasons that I drink tea is for health and for hydration. So if anybody ever looks at a list of the top 10 healthiest foods that a person can eat, tea is always on the list, and although any type of tea would be beneficial, it usually lists green tea. And now I think that this one has gotten to a flavor where, a temperature where I can enjoy it. I will put number 7 in a mug. And here is number 8, just to show that it is possible, with a high leaf to water ratio, to have 8 steepings to drink mass quantities of tea for a daily drinker. Ah, now that's a cup of tea. So I've reestablished the table for a different setup, and that was all about green tea, but I do want to mention that there are other teas that could be used. And so, for example, this is a Lijian High Mountain tea from Taiwan, and let's just take a little look at it. It could be used for a daily drinker. And so this one is fresh from a friend, I would call him, named Lee, who is from Taiwan, and he sells it at the Fragrant Tea Leaf here in Albuquerque. And so we talked about the $1 million plus kind of oolong. This is not that, but again, it's in the $6 and $7 per ounce range, so it's in the teens of cents per price. And here's another one that could be used. This is Pasha Mountain Large Leaf Assamica Black Tea from Yunnan Sourcing. Mr. Wilson, who has a family that has a tea plantation. So this is a black tea, large leaf. And again, I could do everything that I did with the green tea with either one or both of these. But what we're going to do is shift to the college level, the alpha and the omega. The alpha was the green tea. We're going to go to the college level, which is pu'er. So I already talked about one of the alternatives, which is cold tea. Let's shift to another one called Kung Fu style. I once had the privilege of having tea with a fellow from Taiwan who every evening he enjoyed particularly oolong, and he would sit before some kind of teaware like this. And it's not really about the teaware, but about the meditative practice that he particularly and others do when he had tea for about 2 hours every evening to relax. And so in this particular case, we're talking about bamboo and clay. I happen to have a different teapot for each green tea, oolong, and pu'er. This would be to demonstrate the leaf as we're passing it among people. The pots would be passed among people, their ceremony. I'm using a gourd strainer and have a little froggy here just for good luck. And again, this would be very ceremonial, involving special pu'ers like these that are 30 years old plus and given to me as presents. And for example, this pu'er was given to me as part of a group ceremony of tea in the Yunnan province by Mr. Chang, who was in charge of the whole export business of tea from China. This tea was particularly picked in 1985 and processed in 1988, and it is still sealed. And I am contemplating that if anybody ever wanted to try some very special tea made for the French market and handed to us by the guy who knew everything about tea, I would let this go for about $10,000. So what we're going to do, though, is talk about a daily drinker. And so in that case, I'm going to use a pu'er tuocha. And that is a little thing like this. This is a mini tuocha, a little mini cake. And it's a little cake of tea. These were originally made, they were worked well on the silk trail, the silk route from China to be carried across Asia as cakes, which were portable, compressed, etc. And I'm going to drop that into this little pitcher and pour some boiling water on it. And in that first green tea, actually, it took about 2 or 3 steepings for the leaf to actually open up completely. Now this Pu'er tuocha, I like to let it open up by itself and let the water do the work. I'm going to give it a little push there. And while it's doing that, so second of the alternatives would be you could sit down with Kung Fu style and enjoy some way of doing that. Third way would be called, as Frank Murphy called it, wouldn't leave home without it. It's taking one of these little tuochas, unwrap it, put it in a cup like this, and when you're at a meeting or a conference or somewhere traveling and you're somewhere and you want your daily drinker Pu'er, you just pop this little tuocha cake right down in the bottom of this cup. Fill this up with some boiling water from your favorite coffee shop or convenience store. Put a lid on it and make this into something like an all-day sucker, and you can get 6 or 8 steepings out of this easily while you're traveling. So this cake hasn't opened up yet, and once it does, you're going to see something that people wouldn't really believe, which is how fast the next steeping is. And so a lot of people would throw away this first one. Let me just give you a demonstration of how the teaware would work, but you see that is already Pu'er. First steeping could be called the rinse, and you could just throw it away. You could call it a rinse because this cake, I bought it in 2008 from the Imperial Tea Court. The tuocha is still sitting there. My water is still hot. I'm going to pour this on here. And this is called water on, water off. And a lot of people just don't even believe this. And that is Pu'er. And the advantage of decanting again is that I can quickly get that water off of the leaf and control it. If I were serving Kung Fu style with a variety of guests and I didn't have a decanter, I would have to take my little teapot and go from cup to cup to cup, and so that the strength of the tea is equal for everybody. But with my decanter, it is consistent, and as you saw, that was water on and water off. And again, I like my tea a little bit on the cool side, so I'm going to set that aside. And let's just throw on this water, which again has started to cool. The whole thing about tea is heating and cooling. And there we go. And I can't get this water off of here quick enough because it is tea. And so that is the second steeping. Now, trust me, I could go through all 8 steepings, and this little tuocha is still not completely broken up so that the leaves are all exposed to the water. This is my second steeping. I think I'm going to put it in this cup just for variety. And that is if I don't count the rinse as a steeping. Let's just throw some more water on here. Again, my water is already cooled. Water on. Don't even have time to stir it. Water off. I saw this in China, the water on, water off technique, so it is official. It can be done. If you look at the instructions for any tea, it's going to say X amount of temperature of water for X amount of time. You do it your way. I'm calling this third steeping is already Pu'er. When I get down, and I'm not going to show you all the way to the 8th steeping, but when I get down to that, we're going to have what we call a walk-away tea. I learned the term walk-away tea from Michael Wong when he was operating the Tea Gallery in the Lower East Side of Manhattan, where I had the privilege of, in 2006, every Friday afternoon, joining him with some friends, usually about 5 or 6 people total, as Michael would prepare tea. And we might start with something else, but we would sooner or later get to Pu'er and talk only about tea for 2 or 3 hours on a Friday afternoon. So one time I had the privilege of being alone with Mr. Wong at the Tea Gallery, and he said to me, "Hey Dave, have a sip of this." And he held up to me a cup of tea, and it looked like water. And I said, "What is it?" And he said, "Taste it and tell me what you think it is." So I tasted it and it said it tastes like water. He finally told me that it was some 100-year-old pu'er that he had steeped for 35 times, and the last time was all night overnight. Poured hot boiling water on it and let it sit because he wanted to get everything he could out of that very special tea. And the point is, it's called a walk-away tea. I could do that with any of my teas, the green tea, any of these, after I get a number of steepings, just to let the last one take its time. And you can see here, this is a very strong tea. If I pour some water again, my water is cooling. I can't get it off of there fast enough. Number 3. Number 4. And that is strong pu'er, 4th steeping. It'll keep going. And with that, folks, I want to get to the last of the 2 alternatives for a daily drinker real tea. One of the techniques is called tea ball, which effectively involves taking a nice, good, loose tea and putting it in something like this little guy, or this little tea ball, or this little fabric thing. And the main message about that, which works very well, and if you had a place to set the tea ball in between steepings, you could get a whole lot of steepings, but be careful not to do as some tea houses will do, and people which will overpack the device so that the water cannot circulate completely through and touch all the leaves. So a little something to be careful of there. Otherwise, a very bona fide good technique for preparing a daily drinker tea. And the last one, which is totally underrated, this just happens to be a particular brand, and lo and behold, it does say on the box, green tea, super antioxidant, helps reduce free radicals. So again, for my purpose in drinking tea for health and hydration, this is a tea bag, and you can load yourself up with tea bags and conveniently at any place just make all the tea you want all day long. And so those are 5 alternatives and my daily drinker tea technique, used more than 500 times over multiple years. Let's try this one. Maybe it's cold enough for me. Ah, now that's a cup of tea. Another reason people enjoy tea is for the spirituality of it, as best described by Frank Murphy in his book, The Spirit of Tea, which describes the epiphany that he experienced when he first had pu'er, and then goes on to describe the gratitude with all of the tea workers who've raised and processed the tea and transported it to us, and then the people who've taught us how to enjoy tea, and well described in his book. And if I've talked a lot about tea preparation, Lu Yu, the god of tea in the 800s, who described all of the teaware, a lot of which we're using today, and the water and the leaf and everything, if I paraphrase, he actually also said something like, don't worry about everything so minutely. All you have to do is get a good leaf and throw some hot water on it. And so we do offer thanks again to Lu Yu.